Now, as we all know, money is incredibly important. It's the one thing that makes the whole world run. And of course, we see some strange currency in the world of Hyrule as well. The mystical rupees that everyone uses to pay for their day-to-day products. However, why did they start using these as a currency? And why is it even valuable? Sometimes you can even buy the same goods hundreds of years later for the exact same price. How is that even possible? Well, today we will find out. Personally, I'm a big fan of economics. I read stuff about it, watch videos and movies related to it, and I have been investing in the stock market for more than 5 years. So I've been excited to make something like this for quite a while. So let's dive right in. Now, to understand why the rupees are even worth anything or needed at all, we will have to look at real-life history. And Skyward Sword, which is the first game in the Zelda franchise's story. Now let's start with the real-world history. Originally, money was a form of receipt, representing stored grain. We saw this in ancient Egypt. Food was a currency there. However, later on in the first stages of real currencies, metals were used as a symbol to represent value stored in the form of commodities. This was in 3300 BC to 1200 BC, which was during the Bronze Age. Now, we don't exactly know what we used as currency for these exchanges, but it is thought that ox-hide-shaped ingots of copper produced in Cyprus may have functioned as a currency. Later on, all of this collapsed and people went back to bartering, trading certain things like bread for other stuff like milk, which is an age-old system that was used before, during, and even after the Bronze Age to get your groceries or certain materials for a new shed. Even today, we still use it from time to time. However, all of this was quite inconvenient, as you can imagine. Prices for certain things could vary wildly, and there wasn't really a way to store value. A lot of goods go bad eventually after all. Think of eggs, for example. And so they had to come up with a good store of value. A way to maintain and grow your money. And so metals like silver, gold, copper, and bronze were introduced. These things didn't have an expiration date. They could be stamped so you knew where they came from, what their weight is, and if they were real, and it required effort and time to mine and refine these coins. That way, people couldn't easily make their own money, and it already had value from the very start, since it was hard to get after all. Now, most major economies using coins all had several tiers of coins of different value, made of copper, silver, and gold, with the last one being the most valuable, and these were used for large purchases. Now, for years, the economies of the world worked like that, and even nowadays, precious metals are worth a whole lot of money. However, at some point, carrying around heavy metals was too big of an effort. And so paper money was invented, and even later on we got the digital system. Now, there were a couple of other reasons why all of that happened, however I will get to that later on in the video. For now, we at least have an idea how currencies came into existence and why they were even created. And now, to get back on subject, in The Legend of Zelda they did the same thing, but instead of using metals for it, they went with gems known as rupees. They are used in the lands of Hyrule, the Dark World, Koholint Island, Termina, Labrina, Holodrum, the Great Sea, literally everywhere. And just like we saw in real life, there are different levels of rupees, all being a different value, with the gold one being the most valuable, which probably means that they are quite rare. Now, all of this most likely started for the exact same reason why we did it. They wanted to trade goods and needed a standardized way of doing that, and the ability to store their value. And so they went with these gems because they are hard to counterfeit, are probably rare, which gives them value and makes sure that they maintain their value and they don't go bad or something. Now, this system was probably created before the events of Skyward Sword, when they still lived on the surface of the earth. Otherwise, getting gems would be borderline impossible. And by the looks of it, this monetary system has survived for centuries upon centuries, because even in much later games we still see and use rupees. And it has also served the Hylians and other races well, creating amazing kingdoms like Hyrule in Twilight Princess, or the wonderful Clock Town in Termina from Majora's Mask. However, now that we understand why currencies like this are created and what people use them for, we can look at the rupees. Because one question you might have is, why are rupees still used, and so incredibly valuable in the worlds we visit? As most of you know, some countries in real life mess up, and so their currencies become absolutely worthless. Think of Germany in the 1930s, Venezuela in 2013, and even recently in Lebanon, where the value of their currency dropped by 60% in a month against the dollar. Now, what this means is that people don't really value the currency, so you need to put down more and more and more money to buy certain goods. In Germany during the 1930s, it was even so bad that you had to pay millions in the early morning for bread, and then the same night it would cost you billions. That's how fast it was losing its value. And throughout history, this has happened to almost every currency. You might not believe it, but one day the euro or the dollar might fall as well. The chance is certainly there. So how does a kingdom like Hyrule maintain such a stable currency, even though there are constant problems like Ganondorf? Well, it's actually because of a certain aspect that the currency has, which makes it almost invincible. And in order to explain this, I will have to, yet again, mention some real-life history. Because we actually made a mistake. Now, do you remember what I said about precious metals being used as a currency, right? And that later on they started using paper and computers to keep track of it all and trade? Well, during the transition from physical metals to pieces of paper and computers, they did something quite strange. Back in those days, there was something called the gold standard, which basically means that money like pounds, dollars, or anything else was backed up by gold. If you had a $100 bill, for example, you could either keep it in paper form or go to the bank to receive the value in actual gold or silver. That was also part of the whole package. I'm not kidding. This system was widely used in the 19th and 20th century. Under such a system, banks and many others could only lend out money they actually had, because they needed a certain amount of gold to back it up after all. And another thing it did was create a pretty stable price for all the currencies under it, because gold was rare and expensive to process, which made it valuable. For example, if it was backed up by sand, then this wouldn't be the case. Sand is everywhere and it requires no effort to obtain or refine, so it's not worth much. Now, as you can imagine, everything went well and money across the world that was backed up by gold somehow was stable. However, at some point, all of this went wrong. Almost all nations abandoned the gold standard at some point in the 20th century. And this wasn't because it was truly flawed. Oh no. It's actually because of greed if you truly look into it. Because banks, especially in the United States, started to print more and more dollar bills without the gold to back it up. And they did that because they thought they could get away with it. Because not everyone could come to the bank at once to claim their gold, right? Wrong. There were certain events that led to massive withdrawals of gold, like world wars, and massive economic depressions like the one in America during the 1930s. Thanks to events like these and too much printing, the banks were lacking the gold to help economies bounce back, fund wars, and even for people to cash out their gold. And so countries started to abandon this economic system, especially because a lot of currencies were backed by US dollar, who in turn were backed by gold. And so without the need for a certain amount of gold to back up the dollars you're printing, they could print as much as they want, whenever they want. From that point onward, currencies started to lose their value rapidly because of inflation. A good example of this is the US dollar, which has lost more than 96% of its value in about 100 years. And that's mostly because of printing. Now, what all of this means is the following. Let's say you have $100 in 2020. With this money, you can't buy that much. Maybe 2 Nintendo games. However, in 1920, the same $100 is actually worth more than $1,200 in today's money. You could buy much more with less money back then. And this effect is still seen today. Every year, your money loses around 2% of its power, making $100 more and more and more useless. And that's all because of money printing. They don't need gold anymore to print dollar bills after all, so they can make as much as they want. And like I explained with sand before, this makes it less valuable. Especially if the Federal Reserve of the United States prints around $7 trillion just to pay their bills because of a certain cough striking the nation.
But how does all of this relate to The Legend of Zelda, Wily? Was this just an excuse for you to talk about economics?
Well, I mean, yes, but it does relate to the topic of the rupees, because it can 100% explain why they are so valuable in every game. The Kingdom of Hyrule never went over to paper money. It's just not a thing in any of the games. Sure, you have land deeds and contracts for orders in the games, but they don't represent rupees or something. And so the only way to pay for something is taking out your wallet and grabbing those chunky rupees to get some more bombs. bombs. Now, while this can be very inconvenient because you're constantly carrying around huge gems with you that can get lost easily and are hard to carry, it does make sure that no one can exceed the supply of rupees out there by printing a lot of rupee dollars. They are basically on some sort of rupee standard. There's a set supply that increases very slowly, and it costs quite a lot of money and effort to make more of them, which isn't the case with printed paper. And the fact that there's a war every now and then stopping the production and mining of more rupees also helps with that. It might even cause deflation, which means that rupees become even more valuable. This also explains why the value of bombs varies so much. It's all based on how many bombs there are for sale, with the value of rupees being quite stable. In Skyward Sword, for example, you pay 20 rupees for 10 bombs, and it's the exact same in the Wind Waker. Now that's something you will never see in real life, unless we're talking cryptocurrencies or gold. Clearly, the rupee currency in The Legend of Zelda works very differently from euros or dollars. And now you all know why the rupees are so incredibly valuable. And you also learned some real-life economics and history. Thanks for watching, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the little bell, check the videos in the upper right corner and leave a little like, and be sure to comment something naughty or nice, and I will see you all in the next one.